Let's get the show on the road. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your weekly update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we'll talk about the importance of trees in urban forests with members of the executive team of the Texas Trees Foundation. Janette Monear, President and CEO of the Texas Trees Foundation, and Ryan Larson, who is the Director of Development. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we will take 3 snap polls during the show, and we'll announce results. And questions submitted to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you both for joining us. It's great, and thank you attendees for coming. National Arbor Day is going to be celebrated at the end of the month. I know that Texas has a different day. Janette, you told me it's in November, but today is Earth Day as well. So let's start this conversation by talking about the importance of trees, not only to our environment, but also to the mental and physical well-being of people living in urban areas like Dallas.
Correct. And trees are one of the most important things that we have on this planet, and one of the longest living organisms there is. And I always say that there is a symbiotic relationship between trees and people. We need them and they need us. And I think they need us less than we need them. But if you look at the power of trees, it's pretty remarkable. The environmental, the economic, the physical, the social, and even the spiritual aspects of trees are really kind of what makes the quality of life in our cities. And what we're finding over the last few years in the research is that trees directly impact our health, our both physical and mental health and well-being. And so if you start looking at what we call the biophilic effect, and that's our innate connection to nature and trees, we're starting now to recognize nationally and globally the importance of trees in our lives as part of the infrastructure of our communities. And, you know, we typically look at trees for oxygen and air quality, but it's so much more than that, because our brains are actually, if you look at our brains, they are very connected to green and infrastructure. And if you want to talk, about fractals, those kinds of things, we are wired to connect with nature. And Ulrich did some of the first studies back in the 80s about trees and looking out of a window after operations and the reduction of post-operative complications. And I think that was really what set off the looking at health and nature. And what we are doing with all of our programs now is wrapping all of our programming in projects around in this health lens with trees and nature, especially one project in a medical district.
Well, one of the things that I think is so interesting, and this is one of the reasons we do this show, right? If you look at how media treats issues of import, politics, wars, crime, shootings, those kinds of things, celebrities get a lot of attention. Then you look at trees, and there's a little bit of, well, that's cute, kind of an attitude. But then we start thinking, what happens if we took all the trees out of an urban environment? And there are urban areas in Dallas, in any urban area, where there are no trees, right? Those are not attractive places to live. That's not where people want to be. And very often the people who are there are impoverished, and the services are not particularly good. And you sort of see that endemic divide between people who have and people who have not, very often along racial lines. So when we look at where we actually live, the places that we feel are the best places to live are places with greenery, right, Ryan? I mean, that's really part of what Janette was saying. So this is not a side issue. It really is a quality of human life issue in America.
Yeah, and when we have done our research, we're able to go and see where tree canopy lacks, and then also go and map that over with areas that have high minority populations or high poverty. And so you do have some intersectionality between, okay, trees and also the societal issues that we're trying to deal with and trying to remedy. So it's a good place to be in terms of our positioning, because we can hit and provide multiple places for public good in the work that we do.
Right, and it's the quality of life. It's that stressor within neighborhoods, right? It's the quality of life. It's the trauma alleviation, right? That we're all feeling because of COVID. That's part of it. It's having a little bit of biodiversity in our city. So, Janette, let's talk a little bit about the actual programs that you have to ensure that we are repairing our urban environments and also preserving what we have. So if you could just sort of give us a sense of how the organization goes about its mission.
So I came to Texas in 2007, and at that point in time, we really were not talking about climate change.
Right.
So I had to very quickly figure out how we were going to move this organization forward. And that I figured out was doing studies and research. And so in 2015, we launched the State of the Dallas Urban Forest Report, which was 3 studies that from 2010 and 2015. And we launched that report with Mayor Rawlings. And that report really showed what percent of tree canopy we had. We had 28% tree canopy. 40% is really a good tree canopy cover for cities. And we knew we had 1.8 million potential tree planting sites. But what that study showed was that we also had 35% impervious surface. So we did the next study, which was the Urban Heat Island Mitigation Study. And that we could then look at urban design and really start directing our efforts to those areas that had lower income, especially, but higher heat. So one of the things that we looked at is we looked at our school campuses in Dallas, and every school campus had less than 5% tree canopy. The average was around 2 to 3. And so we knew that we needed to do something on our campuses at schools, because that also added to kind of our carbon sinks, so to speak, for the whole city of Dallas. So we started a program called Cool Schools, which develops outdoor environmental learning areas,
Right.
which integrates and aligns with TEACS and is based in SMART. And so that program has been very successful. We aligned that with the city of Dallas to expand the number of parks within a 10-minute walk in Dallas. And so that program is going very well, and we've identified 40 schools to work with. The other project that we looked at is also our neighborhoods projects. And the neighborhoods program really looks at a neighborhood scale. And there's a couple things for this. And we're looking at public lands mostly, but we're looking at how we can bring down the urban heat, but get the community involved in those projects more. Our biggest project is the Southwest Medical District. The medical district is the major health district in the city of Dallas. It's a regional hospital district. It's about 1,000 acres.
Right.
But what we're doing there is we're actually redesigning the streetscapes of the whole district. And the project that we have now is a project which is on Harry Hines, which used to be one of the first major highways through the city of Dallas from downtown Dallas to Denton. And we're redesigning those streetscapes, and that's and taking out an intersection, an old cloverleaf intersection. But what this project does really, Mark, is it really transcends us from tree planting to really strategically looking at where we're planting trees, why we're planting trees, and looking at the infrastructure and how we're planting trees. So the Southwest Medical District is about a $200 million project, and that's an audacious goal to do, but we've started that project, and we're really stitching together 3 hospital campuses to the public right-of-ways and creating this enormous green space in a 14-acre park right in the center of it. And then we also look at our downtown areas and how do people traverse downtown from building to building or park to park or area to area in the shade. So it's really about mitigation of urban heat, quality of life, and all of these things that intersect. And, you know, you mentioned about low-income neighborhoods, and one of the things that we see clearly is our public transportation corridors have really contributed to these neighborhoods being less healthy. And so if we can start looking at how we redesign those streetscapes and bring down the CO2 and really make them feel safer and more connected, I think that is where we get to bringing down stress levels and things that affect human health at a biomarker level.
The thing that I think that is so wonderful about this whole narrative that you just laid out for us is that you don't have to be a woo-woo believer in some theoretical notion. We have, for example, determined that clover leaves are not particularly effective in terms of traffic management. They create huge heat sinks, and they don't actually manage traffic very well. We can deconstruct those. And one of the things I've been looking at, I've been playing with Google's history map. Have you seen these things where you can actually take a look at satellite images through time? And you can actually go back. When you look at urban areas, what you see is that the most attractive neighborhoods, which tend to map to areas that previously were forested and had a lot of trees and had a lot of water in them and so on and so forth, they become areas where people live. They get paved over, the trees get cut down. And then as we get smarter, they become reforested, right? Which is essentially what you're doing. You're basically taking the mistakes of the past and you're adjusting them. And it's all about quality of life. It's all about their economic interests, right? Neighborhoods that are more attractive, that are less hot, are going to be more valuable neighborhoods. It's about social equity, which leads to less trauma and more peace. Ryan, when you ask somebody for an investor to invest in something that will bring them no return, no financial return, how do you pitch this? When you try and get people to come and help Janette raise that $250 million, what is the value proposition for people in Dallas to invest in your programs?
Well, I guess that's kind of where the pandemic, there's been a silver lining to that, because people are feeling the impact and the benefits of getting outside and getting out in greenery, you know. And so whereas you probably in the past felt, okay, yeah, trees are good. We always kind of start at that common ground, but now it's like, okay, they're not just good, but they affect my spiritual well-being. They affect my mental health. So the value proposition is getting easier to share with corporations and individuals because they now actually feel it at much more than they ever have before. Now, the question then is how do I get somebody from, you know, generally they Google, I want to plant a tree, okay? They land on Texas Trees Foundation because we have trees in our name. And how do I get behind them beyond just one-off tree planting? And I think that dives back to our research and what we're telling folks about and sharing folks and educating with folks about the benefits of trees and how comprehensive they are. Not just even, you know, personal well-being, but also like they reduce crime. They increase property values. There are so many things that we are able to go and then share. And so then what our job is to say, okay, here are the projects that we have identified and prioritized, and we are strategically going forward to move the needle. And then that's what they get excited about. And that's what they look at in terms of like investing for the long term. So it's not just some one-off. And that's where we really want to get to.
You're making a really interesting point. By the way, we just finished a poll in which we said how important to quality of life of residents are urban forests and green spaces. 92% said absolutely important, and the rest said very important. But you're making a really interesting point. Trees reduce crime. Trees attract employees, right? Trees help people feel better. Trees will reduce the impact of COVID. It's interesting to make those connections, because in that, if you have a lot of employees and you want to attract the best and the brightest, there is a reason to invest, isn't there, Janette?
There is a reason to invest. And when I'm talking with donors, one of the things that they really like is the research and the strategy. And the more strategic you are, the less controversial your work is as well, because the data backs up that work. But when you start looking at urban forestry around the country, there's no question that those cities that have higher canopy cover are much more healthy and much more, in some ways, they draw a lot of new business. One of the things that's important, Mark, I think to remember is that especially in areas like Texas, when we're drawing new employees from areas like Chicago or Portland or Seattle, these cities that have trees, Minneapolis, it's not about just getting people here, it's about retaining people here.
Right.
And so when they start seeing that there's, and the city of Dallas really has done an exceptional job, I think, over the last 5 years in terms of looking at mobility studies, looking at trails, and looking at urban forestry. We're just completing a master plan, urban forestry master plan for the city of Dallas. They've never had one. But the other thing is that the work that we've done has really catalyzed the kind of work that the city is looking at. They now have their first comprehensive environmental plan, and the State of the Dallas Urban Forest Report and the Urban Heat Island study were instrumental in perpetuating the thinking in City Hall to get things more aligned for a more sustainable and resilient city.
I have a question about the research. It annoys me to know when research really is simply a cover for already reached conclusions, right? You've seen this. You've seen this in business. You see it in nonprofits. You sort of start with the conclusion, then you shape research in order to deliver the conclusion that you've already reached. How do you make sure that your research has the credibility among skeptics who are really interested in facts, but are not interested in manipulations and push polls and those kinds of things? They really want to see that what you are doing actually addresses a question that needs answered. How do you shape your research in that sense?
We model. So we model what we're doing, and sometimes you aren't able to pull some of those folks in right away. But when they see the before and the after, and they feel, not too many years ago, I was walking with the mayor downtown, and it was really hot until we got to one certain area in the arts district. And Tom said, well, it's really cool here. And I said, that's because of the trees, And so when you start looking at how trees affect temperatures in cities, and that gets again back to the urban heat island effect. We're not just talking about air temperatures. We're talking about surface temperatures. And in the city of Dallas, a couple of years ago, we were out doing some surface temperatures. And at the city of Dallas campus, their plaza there was over 147 degrees. So when you start kind of then looking at that and you start explaining that even the air intake into that building is overwhelmed by hotter temperatures because of that, that's when you start kind of modeling. I think the biggest challenge to what you're talking about, Mark, is how do we educate over a plethora of different areas of research and of different aspects of the benefits of trees. And that's a bit harder, I think, to do in terms of, we write position papers for the city of Dallas decision makers, just because it's hard for everybody to understand and get into all of this with all of the others, like Ryan had mentioned, noise that's going on and issues that have to be addressed. So
what you're saying is keep it commonsensical, make it about common sense, make it about the human experience.
Yes.
The second thing you're saying, don't be overly complicated. We just asked a poll, what is the most important benefit that trees bring to urban spaces? We had all these different options: air pollution, soil erosion, noise pollution. Actually, people focused on a few things, right? Improve physical and mental health, climate change mitigation, provide shade and heat reduction. And then there was a couple of answers related to wildlife and plant diversity and beauty of cities. But basically, people focused on a few answers rather than a lot of other background noise that we inserted into the picture. They selected what was important to them. And I guess what you're saying is just reference everybody's experience, figure out what the facts are, provide the facts, and then interact with your audience in a way that drives forward your programs, right, Ryan?
Yeah, and if I could just add one more item, and that's why the Southwestern Medical District project is so important, because we're going to have a before and after, and it's not just about putting in a park and doing a streetscape and planting a bunch of trees. We will be able to conduct longitudinal studies over the time and then be able to go and share, what does this area look like? What happens when we actually design for people? What happens to the neighborhoods and to the mental health and the actual, as Janette said, biophilic metrics to people as they interact with green spaces? And we will have the actual data, and it's going to be compelling. And we think that for leaders within city government, it's kind of nice for City of Dallas to say, yeah, we're paving the way here on green spaces and the importance of them. We're the model for the rest of the country and elsewhere.
So if I'm a Dallas-based banker with a really strong relationship with my friends over in Houston who are in the oil industry, and I don't believe in climate change at all, your pitch is your pitch. You still can talk with me. You can still talk about these projects. And I can still, regardless as to whether I buy the issues of climate change and so on and so forth, I can still feel the heat, right? Because I'm still walking on the street with you, Janette, right? I can still think about the fact that those neighborhoods are more valuable when they have tree coverage and foliage and so on. People seem to be happier. You can still pitch me, right, Ryan?
Exactly.
Yeah, we can still pitch, but also your employees are going to pitch you too, because your employees are going to be coming into that organization and saying, okay, what are we doing about climate? What are we doing about urban heat? What are we doing? I want to have a livable place for my kids. And so we're seeing more and more companies with green teams, and generally they are filled with younger folks that are participating in those. We're leveraging that. And fortunately, many of the leadership of these companies are seeing and acting on the push from their employees, which is a good thing.
And then Governor Abbott and the government of Texas also is trying to be responsible to its citizens. So again, you finesse this whole unproductive debate, right, Janette, of whether people believe or don't believe. They can just feel, right? They can feel what they experience every day and be responsive to their constituents, and then you end up having allies instead of having these silly debates, right?
Right, and Governor Abbott is very involved in our Southwest Medical District, as is Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson and Representative Colin Allred. So, I think that when you start looking at the work that you're doing, you also have to really start looking at what is the advocacy framework you're working in. Because, for Governor Abbott, he's really looking at how the work that we're doing in the Southwest Medical District can promote economic development. Representative Johnson is a former nurse, and she's looking at the health and wellness as well as kind of the equity issues in the area. So you made a really good point, Mark, in terms of how you bring it to each individual, whether they and how then they can take it to their constituents. And so it's getting back, it's kind of that symbiotic relationship between trees and people and how it actually affects them and the things they like to do. People that love to go trout fishing, if the waters are too hot, there is no trout to fish.
No trout.
So,
Well, frankly, if the waters are just right, I can't catch a trout to save my life. So I have to confess, have tried. Trout don't like me. Either that or I'm a completely unskilled fisherman. That might be a possibility as well.
So we work in urban areas, but if you're looking at things like watershed management, when you're looking at transportation corridors, when you're looking, it's all interconnected, and it's kind of the ecosystem, and rebalancing that ecosystem in cities through trees and green infrastructure.
Well, there's so much that binds the nation together, and you can go to any urban environment, any place in the United States, and you have these same issues. And there's a lot that you do that can inform others. We just completed another poll, really interesting results. Would you consider moving to a neighborhood without parks, trees, and other green spaces? And fully 58% said, I would never move to a place without green spaces in the neighborhood. And then there were 8% that said if the cost of living was 20% cheaper, I would move. And there were a few people, it had to be 30% cheaper. And 25% said, yes, okay, I might do it if it was 25% less expensive to move there. I'm sorry, 40% less expensive to move there. So what's interesting is that we tried to create a pricing structure for giving up trees. And we got, some people said never. And we had the rest of them fully 25% said, well, yes, but my cost of living would have to be 40% less, which just shows the value that people place. I think you can find this across the United States. Let's close up. We're coming to the end of our time. So let's close up with lessons that you each feel could be shared with other urban environments across America. Ryan, could you talk a little bit from the fundraising perspective? Then we're going to wind up with you, Janette. But from the fundraising and investor perspective, investing in the United States and in changing the landscape in urban areas, what do you think is the most important lesson that you can provide to different urban environments across America?
I think you have to show those corporations the actual proof of impact and the tangible benefit. And fortunately, when their employees participate in our projects, they can see the actual benefit that they can see that planted tree. And not just that, then they drive by and they monitor it and they care about it, and then they tell me, boy, that tree is looking really, really good. And so for those investors, they are able to go and see their investment in the community. And so that their employees, work and play in. And so our job is to actually share that and communicate our research, communicate our projects in a very, very real way, and then let that conversation breathe. And generally we get the positive result we're looking for.
So what you're saying is, if you don't want to have a transient economy that disappears, you have to have a sustainable neighborhood that people enjoy working in, being in, living in, raising their families in, right?
Correct. And I will even go back to what you said in terms of, like, you put that monetary dollar figure on going to a lower cost living place. Okay, so I moved down here to Dallas from Seattle, so a very forested place. It's a less cost of living, but when you get here, you may come here for that lower cost of living, but then you're going to want to affect the change and look to go and get more greenery, and that's what's happening. So their employees are going to drive it as well.
Interesting, very interesting. Janette, I will give you the last word. What do you think we can teach the entire nation about from the work that you're doing at the Texas Trees Foundation?
Well, trees are kind of they're for everybody, right? And so I would ask and say that connect with trees, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, no matter what level in an organization you are. I think creating that awareness and that relationship with our natural environment, you will automatically then want to advocate and promote and take action to support urban forestry and trees.
And I would point to what you had said previously, Janette. It's the use of facts, right? The whole idea of we should have principles, but the principles also need to be supported by facts on how those principles affect human beings' daily lives. I think that your collection of data, your sharing of data, you're trying to ensure that that data maps to human experience so that it's very easy to connect with. It's not overly complicated and inaccessible. I think that's a really important point, because that with data, we can actually decide what our strategies are to make our lives better. I'd like to thank you both, Janette Monear, President and CEO of the Texas Trees Foundation, and Ryan Larson, Director of Development. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. Attendees, thank you for attending. Thanks for your participation on the questions and the Q&A functions. We'll see you on next Tuesday, where we'll be talking about the foster care system. And everybody, mask up, stay safe. We're almost to the finish line. Let's stay healthy. Thank you so much.